All right. How many of you were in the attended the first presentation I did on my 16 years in Hawaii before uh, I came back?
I was.
I
Too.
was.
Okay, let me share my screen and get things set up. Wait, I'm seeing this whiteboard again. So where is the screen?
Yeah, so there's a share screen on the bottom of your Zoom window. There should be a share screen button.
Select multiple windows.
And then just select the window that corresponds to what you want to share.
Yeah, okay. You see my desktop?
I see a portion. Oh, there it is. I see the 20th century net zero smart cities.
That's basically it. Okay. All right. So I'm going to maybe share a little background a little bit later in this. Let me think. Yeah, I'm gonna do some background in a second. I just want to get through the big headline pieces of what this is about. Suffice to say, approximately in 2012, I started thinking about our country on a national level, and you'll shortly see a map, strategic plan that I produced to outline how we could move to a clean, renewable energy platform as comprehensively as I thought we could over a period of time in a phased manner to the year 2050, and that's 2012. Out of that, what I'm about to show you is was created and was developed from 2012. It got going in 2019 pretty strongly. And during COVID 2022, we had a team that was actively working on this. So this is 21st century net zero smart cities, and our goal to have them be built in many parts of the world, transforming our existing cities primarily to the carbon neutral net zero platform. And the question is, how could you possibly do that in that period of time? So this is myself with a suit on, and my partner in London, Christopher Grant, who had written a book on smart city and artificial intelligence. He discovered my work in late 2019, and we started this together. We had at one time a couple of other engineers involved, civil engineers. We were Zooming conference calls with green steel people in South Africa. It was really going for a while, and then it really got bogged down. We never got pre-development funding for all the work we were doing, and that's part of the reason I ended up back in Hawaii. It just got ground to a halt. So this work is based on looking at the issue of climate change from the standpoint of something that I defined as the 5 critical challenges of the 21st century. And that's certainly not all of them, but these were 5 really big ones: population growth and carbon neutral cities, sustainable clean energy and transportation infrastructure, global poverty and balanced global economic systems, war to peace and the path to a sustainable world community, and climate change and global collaboration. I'm gonna move to first this headline again. And then there is a more detailed explanation of each of these 5 critical challenges. I'm going to touch on one of them in particular: population growth and sustainable cities. Currently, we have about 55% of the world's population living in the world's major cities. And it's predicted that in 2050, we will have approximately 70% of the world's population living in our cities. We will also have another 3 billion people that will be coming to the planet theoretically. And that majority of those people will be living in the world's cities. And so to me, when you really look at those kinds of figures, and then you realize that the vast majority of the carbon footprint of the planet exits through our cities, through all our infrastructure that we have currently, including renewables at this point. Cities are really the game that I wanted to play in more than anything else if it was going to really make a difference. And within cities are all the forms of sustainable energy, transportation infrastructure, everything from electric cars to electric trucks to Hyperloop, which I very much wish we were doing a massive national R&D effort to get it to actually happen, because of all the transit technologies that would really be paradigm shifting. Hyperloop would accomplish that in a big way. Also within our cities, I think it would change the paradigm in really being able to use rapid transit, and I mean high speed. And I know Hawaii has just gone through a lot to get your BART system going at the incredibly slow speed I understand it's going to operate on. Hawaii is a little bit different. I'm thinking LA and big cities and moving between cities. So when you see all of this, this is really thinking about the country and even the world at a much bigger level. Then there's global poverty. And we realize that we have, in all the ways the world has tried to organize itself, we still end up with about a third of humanity in poverty and in extreme poverty. And then we have, of course, all the homeless people that we see in our streets and the streets of cities all over the country. And how do you begin to deal with that? And if you don't deal with it, you're probably going to continue to have terrorist activities as long as we live. And anything like a civil war, terrorism, Ukraine being attacked by Russia, all of those things displace humanity's ability to work together in developing carbon neutral cities worldwide in a short period of time, and in such a way that I think we can actually address the sustainable poverty issues as well. And this ties back into the work of the eco-villages that I did before, that I presented last week, that those tied into sustainable cities correctly, you can start to activate the country in El Salvador and Mexico and a lot of places where poverty and crime, drugs, etc., really exist. All of that has to do with borders on our borders and pressure on our borders that caused us to fraction in the United States. Over that pressure, it also was pressure that came into Europe when Brexit really took off because of the Syrian situation and North Africa and refugees trying to get in. Europe reacted quite differently when Russia invaded Ukraine, which is very fortunate. I think the world acted in harmony, kind of collectively, in a very strong way, which I think, in a sense, if you could see any kind of bright light in Russia doing this, it was that we came together very quickly. And we were forced into some very big decisions in Europe relative to energy, Germany in particular. France, not so much, because they had nuclear power plants, but Germany didn't. And they really were relying on Russian natural gas. And as we pretty much know, they've been able to shift. Everybody's taken a hit in all of this economically, but they've been able to shift and work together because of that conflict. I always try with conflict to try to see, well, what could come out of this that could be positive in the end. And I think Ukraine could be a very positive thing as long as the world remains resilient, and on the other side of the conflict resolving, which I don't claim to have any idea how that's going to happen in the short run, that they'll have to rebuild. And the world will want to help them rebuild and rebuild anew and rebuild green. And many of these cities can start again, almost like a mini World War II rebuilding of the whole world. The world could help Ukraine, and that could help the world in terms of how we transform our cities. Now, when I started this map that you're seeing right now, this was about 2012. And the work that had led up to that was, this is where I go back a little bit to living in Hawaii for 16 years. When I was 30 years old, I made presentations to, let me make sure I have the right, I was probably a little older than that. In 1987, to Governor Waihee of a vision plan called Hawaii Aloha 2000 that talked about Hawaii being a model of global community. And sustainability was just really starting to be things that we were being told, or, using terms like that were starting to become part of public knowledge. Today, sustainability is well understood by virtually everybody, what you're talking about. From there, we held a whole series of initiatives. We connected Hawaii to the Rio Earth Summit. In 92 and 95, we had another big event. And all of this was revolving around collaborative vision planning that was going on in Hawaii at that time by a number of people at the grassroots level that were promoting it. Now, that's a very short sort of review. And in that space of time, I worked on a design for a sustainable city in Australia as a vision exercise with a group of people on Maui that were connected with this land in Australia, and also eco-villages. So on the one scale, in 1994 was thinking about sustainable cities and all the pieces and parts that would go into them. And then at the same time, we had a homeless problem in Hawaii, which was we came up with a design for sustainable eco-villages, which I think still has relevance. And the eco-village spawned something called Grow Green Power, which you will see again a little bit later in this presentation. And Grow Green Power, in a nutshell, is the combination of sustainable energy sources, thermal usually in the form of biomass power plants or solar thermal power plants, providing thermal energy for absorption chillers that cool and climate control very large commercial scale hydroponic greenhouses. Now, this is something that I was presenting last week. You know what? I should just go right down to this, at least. Otherwise, it's very hard to visualize. Let's go. Here we go. There it is. So this was what we were trying to produce from 2080, when the economy tanked. I founded this with some partners. In 2010, we got an angel investor. In 2011, we were ready to go in front of venture capitalists in North Carolina, which was where this was to be located. What you're looking at is a 100-acre hydroponic greenhouse, 4 quadrants to 25 acres, produces a wide variety of crops, primarily tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers, vine crops, but also lettuces, wide variety of crops. Could be run by geothermal for a thermal energy waste production, and then also biomass is another way that you can run these. And we were going to be located in North Carolina, which deals with very hot, humid summers and reasonably cold winters, ice and snow. And so you have to be able to provide for both. And we would be able to do that with this kind of a design in Dubai, which is very hot and humid, and in Chicago, which is cold, or the Northeast. I personally feel this is a critical element to almost like lifeboats, like Liberty boats that should be around American cities and cities around the world, with the likely disruption of weather patterns due to climate change in the forthcoming years, which could disrupt the food supply. Okay, so back to this map. Basically, at that time in 2012, we were semi-funded from the work that we were doing with Grow Green Power. Now, by the way, we were never able to get Grow Green Power off the ground. Fracking came to the Northeast in about 2012, disrupted the power purchase agreements. The whole economics became very difficult, and my partners finally folded the cards when COVID began. And so that was a long effort to try to get something in the ground, also make a living, make a very good living, and ideally have been by now been producing maybe 5 or 6 of these greenhouses near large cities around the world by this time in my life. But that's not what happened. In the meantime, in 2012, nobody that I could see was putting together a strategic map of the United States that could describe how we could become virtually run on renewable energy. Now, the NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, had done a lot of work, which I incorporated in this map, to show where renewable energy was around the country in the various regions of the country. And what it basically showed was we had way more than we could possibly use for the energy needs of the United States. We have so much abundance in renewable energy, it's incredible. If you totally, used it all, which you would never even come close. So the numbers are down in the lower part of this chart, and I think most of you are probably on a laptop, so let's see if I can get it big enough so you can see this.
Chris, can you explain again what we're seeing on the map? What are all those dots and all the lines between them?
Okay, so so a couple of things. The things that will pop out at you, the majority of dots are our major cities. Thank you for asking that question, because if that's what everybody was wondering, it's important that you know. There are also green dots which were potential new carbon neutral prototypes. Now, I've focused on one in particular, which you're going to see in this presentation. The other thing that you're seeing are the connecting lines. Now, those were high-speed rail lines back in 2012. I hadn't heard, I think Elon may have published that paper that he did initially about 2012, but it wasn't sort of out in the public realm until later. But these were there was a group of urban planners in the Northeast that had laid out part of this. I adapted it as I went around the country. So you see like a red zone here. This is the Northeast quarter. There's one in the middle of the country. And what I was starting to do is to divide the country into regions. This is the Colorado region. This is the Western Pacific region to Salt Lake City and up to Canada. And you can see the white circles that I started drawing around these things. And the other thing that I realized was that we would probably need to develop a high voltage. There were 2 forms of superconducting that I knew of. One was cold fusion, I think it was called, which uses a lot of solar and cools wires. That's the most efficient, but it's very much more difficult than what is known as high voltage direct current. So in order to transport large amounts of energy across long distance, you need something like a high voltage direct current means of wheeling that energy across the country in a smart grid to move off a renewable energy field using DC and then shifting to AC as you produce power for your cities in the normal way. So the 2 corridors that you see in this map are on I-40 going east and west, which I-40 is relatively devoid of, major mountains and things that you have to cross. And then I-80 all the way through. And as long as you go on I-80, you get through to Salt Lake City, and the only major real mountain pass is Donner Pass, getting from Lake Tahoe over to San Francisco. So that's where I was proposing that we use the right-of-way of our interstate highway system to build tunnels between states. So each state would basically start from their border and build to the center of their state from two directions, the underground chasms that would have all sorts of things in them, but high voltage direct current to wheel energy. So getting back, so does that overall explain this map? What you asked your question about?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Okay, now back to the renewable energy, because it's all based on that. So the NREL back in that time had already developed a series of maps showing where you could actually develop a contract for a solar thermal energy plant or a PV plant or a wind plant, wind power. And so when you look at it, these are the various regions. The first one that you see if you can see where I'm pointing to, is the solar thermal region. And on my map, it's where this yellow cross-hatching is: Southern Nevada, California, through Arizona, parts of New Mexico, and into parts of Texas are the main solar thermal regions. And then above that is geothermal in northern Nevada into Oregon, is that primary area. And then wind goes from Texas up the side of the Rockies up to Canada, the border of Canada, and over to the beginning of the Midwestern states in that area of large fields and farms. So when you add all that energy up, it adds up to 212,000 gigawatts of power potential. And at that time in 2010, we had a generating capacity of 1,137 gigawatts in the United States. So if you take 1,137 and divide it into, 212,000 something, you get about 186 times our needs is how much renewable energy we have. So to me, when you have that kind of information, the question of whether you can do it by renewable energy, the energy's there, and you don't even come close to doing it. If you took the approach, in order to have firm energy where you're storing energy, you might create enough infrastructure to collect the energy to have twice what we need or 3 times what we need, something like that. But you'd end up with about 2,500 gigawatts, maybe 3,000 gigawatts of renewable energy, part of which you're storing. So that's kind of one way. Now, today, when I was doing this, I figured some of the things we would do is we would keep our gas-fired plants on standby so that we always have firm energy for any disruptions. You always can turn a gas-fired energy plant on very quickly, which is one of the really main good things, that if you're using them as a backup system, is fantastic. And put some reality to this. The other thing that I personally have been thinking, which is way off of my main way of thinking all these years, was that on the current situation with Ukraine and the world situation, the speed that we need to do things, that maybe if breeder reactors are real and they do chew up the really bad plutonium, then we should be using them to get rid of the vast amount of really bad waste that we have, and be using these in the short run for firm energy. all this implies that you have to look at this kind of a problem from a strategic point of view. You can't just say, well, the market's going to do it, which is what we've come down to, is that the market's going to do this somehow. That's how most people think. And if they ever see a plan like this, that's socialism, it's communism, it's horrible. It never worked. It never worked before. It'll never work today. Well, I don't believe that. I believe you have to have a nation looking at these things. I'd argue that China kind of does. In terms of it's still it's got a capitalist system. Now, obviously, it's changed over the last couple of years from what it was, let's say, 10 years ago. But essentially, whatever we do, we have to have the ability to think about the whole. And then what I did was say, well, if we're going to think about the whole, we need to have ways of looking at regions of the United States where you're grouping states together and they're working on the big parts of this plan. And that's what you're seeing, is the idea of breaking it into these collaborative initiatives where the real civil engineers and the regional transportation engineers and the regional planners of each state are all working together to figure out how the Pacific Rim would work, for instance, how the Central Plains would work, how the Southeast Corridor would work, how the Northeast Corridor would work. So anyway, I was thinking about all those things and put this drawing together. And I was able to get it to President Obama through a contact that was trying to help us with funding for Grow Green Power that was working with the president. And this was during the 2012 election. He actually received it while he was at Camp David and preparing for the second debate with Mitt Romney. And what I was told was they thought it was very interesting. They'll get back to us if they win. And then Mitch McConnell and the Republicans took over Congress, and they had a whole lot of things that they were dealing with, and I never heard from them,
Chris,
even though I was reaching back. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to direct. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm curious about if any of the analysis that you did focus. You mentioned Pacific Rim, right? So I'm just wondering. A lot of this is what's happening on the possibilities on the mainland, on the continental U.S. But did any of it focus on the Pacific, on Hawaii specifically?
Not the Pacific Rim being with Hawaii. It was the Pacific Western states.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
so is there a way to connect this to Hawaii?
Probably. Yes. I mean, we're all connected in terms of what I'm talking about is the magnitude of what I'm trying to present we would need to be dealing with, and on a national level and at the state level. And mind you that everything that I've done comes from living in Hawaii. I wouldn't have thought the way I am had I not been here in a small arena trying to figure these things out when I was younger. So let me try to, in 10 minutes, speed through the rest of this. We can come back to it if we want to, and so you can see where this goes, because it really goes also to actually dealing with what a carbon neutral city looks like. So let's see if I can move this down. Is that okay with everybody in our next 10 minutes?
Yeah, next 8 minutes.
8 minutes, okay. So the next thing that you're seeing here is a simplified plan of the United States. On the left side, you're going to see Mars Explore City, and you'll see why I call it that and why its location is where it is. But everything that I'm doing with that city is looking at these regions of the United States for how you create the industrial base to go to carbon neutral as quickly as possible. And I think you have to think at a World War II level of mass production, what we did during World War II. You'll see how that relates in a second. We're going to come back to this drawing. So now the next part is the Pacific Rim, and now what you're seeing are Hyperloop lines going to from LA up to San Francisco, from LA up to Las Vegas, up to Salt Lake City and back, and then also going from Los Angeles to Phoenix, over to Las Cruces, Tucson, Las Cruces, and there's a group trying to get Hyperloop to go along the Colorado corridor where this blue line is, if you can see that. So let me keep going. We're now in the general region, and I'm just going to go to drawings because the bullet points, this is set up for you to be able to read it and get the main ideas and then look at the plan, but you can't see it in a presentation like this. So now I'm zooming in to where I was thinking, where would the first carbon neutral prototype go? Because that's what I was thinking of, and that also comes from having worked in Dubai from 1999 to 2008 in particular, all the way to 2014. And I was working on designing and urban planning at a very large urban scale. Everything from Dubai and Dubai Marina to King Abdullah Economic City, projects in Cairo, Bahrain, Qatar, that are all quite large. So I kept thinking, why are we not thinking in any realm like that in the United States? Well, this location that you see is right above Edwards Air Force Base on the 58 highway, I-58. And 58 doesn't sound right. And anyway, the location is right at the junction of the I-14 and the I-53, and and Edwards is just off of that, and directly above it is California City, and the actual California City is 203 square miles of incorporated city that was incorporated in 1965, and nobody knows about it, or they know about it, but they know about it as a ghost town. So, and then I'm showing Hyperloop connection. So to show you how important Hyperloop is, you can, if you drive from Irvine to this area, it's 2 hours and 45 minutes with good traffic. If you were to take a Hyperloop from LA to MXC USA, it'd be 8 minutes. It would be from MXC USA, 25 minutes to San Francisco, 20 minutes to Las Vegas at 640 miles an hour in pods. And it's point to point. That is the other key distinction. You're not in a train that's stopping along the way. You're going point to point. Once you go, you're gone. And you're going faster than an airplane flies. And to my knowledge, they're still saying technically that this is all possible. Okay, this is another view of it. And this is kind of a different angle than you'd normally see LA. But we're now right over Bakersfield, and you see the Mars Explore City area. You see Edwards Air Force Base. I'm coming up through the I-14, and oh no, it was the 58. I'm sorry. So the 58 runs, I'm using my finger, nobody can see that, across here, and goes all the way up to San Francisco, gets to the 91, and goes up to San Francisco. And Los Angeles to San Francisco is about 45 minutes, but California City is almost about 25. And Hyperloop is a big part of the story. The second part of the story is an earlier map. So is the Mars Explore piece. Now, very quickly, this city that you're about to see is based on two pieces, three really. A university that's an MIT level university that will teach people, engineers, finance people, architects, planners, how to collaboratively plan quickly carbon neutral cities. And we'll have people from all over the world coming to this new prototype city and to this university MIT level. The other is that I think it's essential to realize that I've come to the conclusion that expansion is it's just going to happen. So where do we expand? We go into outer space. We start exploring. We use our technical ability not to fight one another, but to explore, and that there is really a need for humanity to be able to continue to do that. It takes a little bit more explanation to go into all the pieces of it, but that's the basis. To put together, if we're really going to go to Mars, when Elon Musk said we were in any 20-year period of time, there is so much more that we need to be thinking about, and we need the infrastructure to support it the way we did when we were doing the Apollo space program. Okay, now I'm going to keep going. Let's see, I've got 2 minutes, so I guess let me just give you a picture of what the city looks like. And so this is the actual city. It's 5 miles long, and I'm gonna zoom in. From the I-14, it's 1 mile deep. It's just a straight line. And the reason it's not, I mean, I'm dealing with a desert. I needed not to be thinking about mountain edges or other kinds of edges to make a more interesting plan. I needed to create a plan that was very understandable for people to understand the pieces and parts. So I don't know if you can see the notes, but these are the 2 universities. There are 3 vertical city cores. So there are no high rises in this linear city except in the 3 vertical city components. Everything else is about an 8-story, 10-story kind of urban plate. And then with other kinds of green spaces where you can walk all the way through. There's a rapid transit system that's point to point in the whole thing. And there's a Hyperloop station. The next part of it is the extension of the Grow Green Power Centers. Here you see 4 of them set up, and that's a huge amount of produce. But in this location, you can send the produce to Las Vegas, you can send the produce to LA, and up to San Francisco. Now, the ideal scenario is to have these things sized very close to a city, so you're reducing your truck driving distances. But we were incorporating it in the prototype. Then there is these very large industrial zones. And this is where the World War II thinking comes in. This city is going to be built with green steel. And that's why we had Zoom calls with people in South Africa. So carbon neutral steel manufacturing within these zones, and these are 1/2 mile by 1 mile industrial zones that can be broken in the middle of them into thinner slices, and then they also have rail coming in off the main rail line in here. And so we can get resources to this whole industrial zone, and we can export Hyperloop components, green trucks, green systems that would go into LA or into San Francisco or into Las Vegas. So it was also right near Edwards. There was a possibility of maybe, I think the reality is slim. There's just too many air corridors here to bring into a Pacific Regional Aerospace Center. The spacecraft, the part that's the MXC exploring part, there's a whole part of the industrial zones that also would be producing component parts for International Space Station, for habitat on Mars. And the missing component in the space program is we send rockets up all the time, but we don't have a day-to-day 5-6 times a day space shuttles going back and forth, aerospace shuttles. And so this fills in that missing component. So you need to, in my view, we shouldn't be blasting off with huge numbers of people in a rocket. We should build a large International Space Station and spacecraft that can stay in space. They never come to the ground, but they have shuttles that come to the ground. It's a far safer I think, way to do things. Anyway, I know there'd be a lot of debate on that idea, but this is what I was bringing to the table. Finally, let's see. Let's just go through this quickly. This plan does include a really huge nature habitat preserve that's part of a natural wash. So desert tortoise and a lot of things you have to think about end up being in a brand new 15 square mile park. And there's solar that's sized to bring to provide the power for the city, and then also the industrial zones. You're actually looking at about 100 megawatts with battery storage in about, gosh, I think it's 4 square miles. It's a lot of area. If you're even going to get 100 square miles or 100 megawatts, 24 hours a day. Anyway, these are some of the other plans. Then there are different views looking back to LA. I'm just going to get quickly through this. There's a lot more detail to it, but it's not, I don't have the backing of, urban planners, and we were trying to get AECOM involved with us, and they were actually very interested, but our pre-development funding didn't come in. We also did a study of my partner and I did, using the same ideas for the corridor, the Front Range corridor of Salt Lake City. And I can't get into it, but there's a lot of detail in that we were thinking inside our city that we had never done, that we actually incorporated in this 600-acre site that called The Point, that they wanted to transform a prison into a smart city, a mini smart city. Here's what pieces and parts. Again, I can come back if there's interest. The other thing that I think is important is that I did a lot of my own research on the internet. And back in 2012, this diagram was a graphic that was on Wikipedia related to the national debt. It's no longer there, and it's a shame because it really said a lot. The graphic, I've added to it. There's a lot more that I added to it, but the basic graphic is this line. And starting in the Civil War, at the end of the Civil War, our national debt was up about 35%. Then it went steadily down, and when World War I began, it went right back up to the same point. It went down during the 20s, and it went right back up higher, almost to 50% in the Great Depression. And then when World War II happened, it went up to 120% of GDP. And then after the war, America started the Marshall Plan. America built the interstate highway system. America did the Apollo space program. My dad was involved in those projects, and many of yours may have been too. I was born in Athens. He was working on Marshall Plan projects, and later on Baghdad, Iraq, and Dhaka, East Pakistan. That's where I started. I know the seeds of what I'm interested in were planted then. But if you look at this, all the debate about infrastructure, where's the money going to come from, and all this, in World War II, we did print money. They issued savings bonds, and we printed a lot of money. And we, in 4 years, did something where government and business totally came together to fight World War II. And then after the war, it hung together for a while, even though we started separating almost immediately. Korean War, Vietnam War, and so forth, to the point that we're in right now. The debt went down for 28 years in a steady curve. Look at that curve. Under Democratic, Republican, Democratic presidents, Republican. This is Nixon. 1973 was the OPEC oil crisis. Then it stabilized out. Carter came to president, and we went into the recession that happened right then. Well, no, that was the inflationary period too. And Reagan came in, and this is right about the time that I was starting to head to try to get in meetings with John Y. Hay. And so he started building the American war infrastructure. And that was the primary effort. He wasn't building highways at that time. And the debt went up. And with George Senior Bush, the Cold War ended. And there's a whole story in there that I'm not going to go into, but it was a dramatic transforming period of time. The 80s were. And Gorbachev, fortunately, was on the other side. And Reagan, when those two men met, they saw eye to eye. And that and a lot of other factors happened, and the Berlin Wall came down. Then during the Clinton years, I'm going over. Are we okay?
Yeah, we're 10 minutes over, so we're losing people now. If you would like, you can share this page, and I'll distribute it to the group. If that it looks like interesting information, a lot of detail that we can't see.
So at this point, a lot of this is semi-proprietary, the city stuff, but I have no way of sharing it with you guys unless I send you. I'll send you the link, and it's downloadable in a high-resolution link. So then you can look at the detail and spend your time looking at it.
I appreciate it.
I think we're all on the same team. We're trying to somehow get these ideas going. So I'm okay with that.
Well, thanks, Chris.
But anyway, just finishing this, the Clinton years were right after the Berlin Wall, and you have Schroeder, Tony Blair, the third way. There was a lot in conflict resolution that happened during this period of time, and the debt went down. Combination of things, very strong Republican pushback at that point, and Clinton adjusted, and the debt went down. And then we go into the George Bush. At the end of it, there's a whole series of things. George W. Bush gets elected, and essentially a year later, we go into 9/11. And then it took a while because he kind of. Sorry. Anyway, then the debt went right back up, and almost the same straight line curve as World War II. And it pushed just above 100%. And then it actually started coming down during the Obama administration. So anyway, what I was trying to use this document and look at all of these things and the historical record of World War II. I won't go into it, but all of that is part of what we're actually right now dealing with Vladimir Putin. And interestingly, I never I'm just speaking personally. I always knew him to be a dangerous person. I never thought that invading Ukraine was really a possibility. It was becoming very obvious it could, but it did. And it's like another shock, just like all the shocks that we've experienced in our lives. 9/11, the 2008 collapse. Suddenly we're in a major conflict that potentially could open up a nuclear conflict. And we have a massive amount that we all need, the whole damn planet needs to work together on. And how you communicate that with the amount of noise that goes into just about any meeting at this point, I don't know. I don't know that I have the energy anymore. It's kind of what I've been feeling recently, and I've had a lot of energy to produce what I've just showed you guys. So anyway, and I definitely go back to it all came from living in Hawaii. That's when I began to think this way.
Well, Chris, really appreciate all this information. Thanks for sharing. Clearly a lot of knowledge and a lot of work went into this. I really appreciate it. And we're close to 15 minutes over.
Yeah, I
Team, thanks very much for joining, and really appreciate you being here. And until next time. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Mitch, Doug.
No, I'll get back in touch with you about whatever's next. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Bye now.